Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Dancer Wore Opera Rose, Mysterious Devices, 2, by Shelley Adina, narrated by Fiona Hardingham. Chapter 1. Wednesday, August 21st, 1895, 12:20 p.m. Within 10 minutes of their airships being moored to its mast at the Santa Fe airfield, Daisy Linden became convinced that there was no other city quite like this one. Not only in the Texican Territories, mind you, but in the entire world. The colours, oh goodness, the colours. She had in her travel paint box burnt sienna, Mars orange, vermilion, aurora yellow. But these could hardly do justice to the rocks and mesas, the spires and even the buildings, for they were all those, and more. And the shadows, indigo, olive green, Payne's grey, even a blue that went straight past India ink to something the midnight sky might make all on its own.
"But we have been here before, Daisy."
Her sister Frederica picked up her valise in one hand and grasped the handle of the late Emma Makepeace's travelling trunk in the other.
"It is not as though these marvels are new to you."
"I know, dearest, but while I remember that the colours enchanted me, all the wonder of our arrival was blotted out by the horror of our return."
"I hope our visit this time will be a better one."
Daisy hoped so too, desperately. But there was no longer any more time to lose in the search for Papa, who had gone missing nearly 2 years before, abducted by the Californios. Granted, they had learned from Captain and Lady Hollies a few weeks ago that Papa had been alive and well back in April, when the couple had left him in Reno, the crossroads city of the Royal Kingdom of Spain and the Californias. According to their information, he had set off to look for his family. What were the odds that their searches for each other might come to a happy conclusion right here? Even had she been a betting woman, Daisy would not have laid money on the odds. Ladies did not indulge themselves in such worldly pursuits. But she was rich in hope, and she dealt that out to fate with a liberal hand. They boarded a steam conveyance with slatted benches and open sides, that the conductor assured them would take them into the centre of the city. Freddie held on to her hat as the steam bus picked up its pace to quite an alarming speed, for there was nothing to hinder its way but peculiar rolling bushes and scented squatty pines and the ubiquitous burnt sienna rocks of this part of the world.
"Ought we have had made inquiries at the airfield, of the ticketing office, the taverns, and a few of the inter-territory ships?"
Freddie asked Daisy above the racket of their going. They were not the only passengers. Most of the people aboard the short-haul packet from Denver were riding the vehicle too. One hated to raise one's voice with one's private concerns, but Daisy could not see how to avoid it. "We shall certainly do so as soon as we may," she replied. "But for now I feel we must wait upon the man in charge of the detachment of Texican Rangers here. I wrote to him from Bath some weeks ago, and I am ashamed to say we are 2 weeks past the day I told him I would be here. But it was unavoidable, of course."
"I am not sorry we are late, not one bit."
Neither was Daisy, for if they had not stayed in Georgetown and made the attempt to discover the murderer of their friend Emma Makepeace, then an innocent man would have gone to the gallows, and a horrible villain would be walking the streets unscathed. That the two situations had been utterly reversed thanks to their efforts, and those of one or two friends, was cause for some satisfaction. If Daisy went to her eternal reward tomorrow, if nothing else, she would have justice on the positive side of the ledger. When they alighted in Santa Fe's main square, it looked vaguely familiar, with its deep wooden awnings called portals, and the squat golden and burnt sienna adobe buildings ranged about it. The Navapai stepped proudly among the Texican men and women, their cream robes and the distinctive double buns of the women's hair making them stand out from the more subdued leather and calico of the Texican citizens. The streets were busy with horse-drawn wagons and the occasional steam vehicle, just as Georgetown had been. but the number of conveyances, shops, livery stables, and places of commerce was much larger. Santa Fe was the capital of the Texican Territories.
Look!
Freddie pointed at a Navapai man cantering past on an extraordinary contraption.
It's a horse, Daisy. A mechanical horse. Do you suppose he built it?
Goodness me, perhaps he did. Look, there is another.
Surely there cannot be a manufactory. How astonishing!
Only the Navapai seemed to be riding the mechanicals, and doing so with a grace and control that was like watching a real animal under the guidance of an expert horseman. Someone passing by bumped her shoulder and brought her out of her admiration with a jolt. "Oops, excuse me, ma'am."
"Not at all,"
she responded automatically. Then, "Would you be so good as to direct us to the ranger outpost?" He laughed, tipping his enormous Stetson to her. "You're not far. Just there across the square and down one block. You'll see the snakes and eagle flag and the crossed swords on blue below it." Of course. She'd been so caught up in the mechanicals she hadn't seen the all-too-familiar Prussian blue field of the ranger flag, waving above the buildings. "Thank you." "Anything to help a pretty lady." He fitted his hat more securely on his head and sauntered off, the spurs on the heels of his boots jingling as they struck the boardwalk. Blushing at the familiarity, Daisy grasped her valise and picked up Freddie's. The travelling trunk was enough for one person to manage. "Come along, dearest." In the vestibule of the Texican Rangers' headquarters, the air was so much cooler than in the heat of the square that Daisy lifted her face as though she had walked into a refreshing breeze. The walls were at least 3 feet thick, which made for wide window-sills, but an oddly telescopic view of the street and square outside.
"It looks like the inside of the Tower of London,"
Freddie whispered.
"Should one be under siege, the window apertures offer some protection while allowing one to shoot, although whom they would shoot I cannot imagine."
"I do not wish to think of being under siege, thank you," Daisy whispered back, and gave their names to the officer behind the counter. In Georgetown, the lieutenant in charge of the ranger outpost had nearly been the cause of an innocent man's condemnation. He had even gone so far as to use murder as an excuse to settle an old debt. Thus, she was not certain what to expect of the man who was that lieutenant's commanding officer. Certainly Mamma had found no satisfaction in his investigations. It remained to be seen whether Daisy could manage to do better. "Ladies, please be seated," General Van Ness said after the civilities of bow and curtsies were observed. Rather than seating them in the wooden, straight-back chairs in front of his desk, however, he indicated instead a comfortable sofa and took a wooden chair facing them for himself. The red-headed officer from outside brought in a tray of glasses and a pitcher of water. They had had tea on the airship, but Daisy was still grateful for the water. She had not forgotten the warning from their erstwhile friend in Georgetown, Hugh Merriweather Astor, about the altitude in these parts, and what would happen if they did not drink often. "Miss Linden, allow me to say what a pleasure it is to meet you after having received your letter," General Van Ness said. "I hope your journey has been pleasant." Daisy and Freddie exchanged a glance. "Yes, very much so," Daisy said, choosing to bypass details altogether. If he had not heard of their involvement in the case in Georgetown, then now was not the time to enlighten him. "This is an extraordinary country with many beauties," he chuckled. "I am glad you see it that way. We men of the law, of course, take a different view. Nestled in every beautiful vista, it seems, is a clutch of train robbers, a flock of air pirates, a troop of brujas who just as soon anyone in a uniform moved himself back to the 15 colonies. "A bruja?" Freddie asked, sounding as confused as Daisy felt. "Bruja. That is the California word for witch," he said briefly. "They live along the Rio de Sangre, Colorado, and cause nothing but trouble." "Oh," Freddie subsided. It was time to direct the conversation into more productive lines. "Since you received my letter, General Van Ness," Daisy began in a businesslike tone, "then you are aware that I am taking up my mother's quest to find my father. Have you been able to glean any new information since she was here making inquiries last year, or even since you received the letter?"
"Sad to say, I have not,"
the officer said. Daisy examined his face, with its long, blondish-grey moustaches that drooped on either side of his mouth. She had seen many a moustache in these parts, turned up at the ends in a sprightly, optimistic manner, and waxed to within an inch of its life. The General did not seem to follow this practice, instead allowing his to flow down in the manner of the cavaliers of old. Was it perhaps to conceal the down-turn of his lips, the sulky cast to his mouth in repose, the slight overbite visible when he did smile?
"Perhaps there has been word among the travellers at the airfield," Freddie asked, "or those who are employed by the airship companies? For we have information that as recently as April, our father, Professor Linden, was planning to make his way back to Santa Fe to look for us."
He sipped his water.
"He was known to be alive in April of this year? 4 months ago?"
"Yes," Daisy said. "Hence our eagerness to hear any news of him. For surely he would have been seen at one of the ticket offices, or even called here to make inquiries about my sister and me. I gave you his description in my letter to remind you of what our mother would have told you. Though my account of his clothing is inaccurate, he was last seen wearing a military greatcoat of Prussian blue wool, not his tweed jacket."
"He certainly hasn't been here," the General said flatly. "And I've heard nothing of an educated man with a Prussian accent, with or without a greatcoat."
"Heard nothing while sitting in his sunlit office with its view of the parade ground, or heard nothing while actively collaring people and asking them questions. Daisy would have given anything to be a man at that moment, with the courage to ask. Oh, bother that. It was only a question. "While you may have heard nothing here at headquarters," she said, "perhaps your men's active questioning of people at the airfield, the boarding-houses and the saloons might have borne some fruit."
"We assume that is how an investigation might be conducted,"
Freddie added.
"We have little experience in such matters, naturally."
"Naturally."
His blue gaze rested upon Daisy, tinged with what might possibly be dislike.
"My men have better things to do with their time than to open a closed missing persons case and start all over again. And now you tell me that your father is well, that no misadventure has befallen him, but instead he is alive, last seen in Reno. By whom was he seen?"
"By Captain Sir Ian and Captain Lady Hollies, of Her Majesty's airship Swan,"
Freddie said proudly. The dislike in his gaze congealed into something positively glacial.
"Then surely you can see that we do not have a case here. Any investigation we might mount would only turn up the same conclusion, that he is alive as of 4 months ago, and nothing unpleasant has happened to him."
"If that were the case, he would have found his way back to us," Daisy said a little flatly. "The questions you must surely ask are, what prevented him, and where is he now?" General Van Ness gazed at her.
"Would he have found his way back to you? Are you quite certain?"
Daisy frowned. "I do not take your meaning, sir."
"I merely point out that this would not be the first time a man has chosen not to return to the bosom of his family. There are many opportunities in the Wild West for a man to remake himself, perhaps in an image that carries fewer expectations and greater freedom."
Both young ladies stared at him until the silence became suffocating. Under her jacket, waist, corset, and chemise, Daisy's heart pounded, flooding her body with the urge to fly across the short distance between them and claw his eyes out. Her silence was not rooted in something as namby-pamby as affront. No, if she was silent, it was because she had no resources to waste if she was to win this heroic struggle for self-control. Now was not the time to be arrested for assaulting an officer. "Then," she said, choosing each word with care,
Are we to infer that you will not be assisting us in locating our father? That the remit of the Texican Rangers does not extend to citizens of Her Majesty, despite the fact that our Texican train was attacked by the Californios and he was abducted not 50 miles from here? He steepled his fingers and touched the forefingers to his lower lip.
Do you believe the Territory culpable in this matter? That because the Californios invaded our lands and kidnapped the male passengers from one of our trains for their work cruise, we bear the responsibility for finding them?
It seems reasonable,
Freddie said after a moment, when it became plain that Daisy was not going to reply to the glaringly obvious.
Then allow me to give you what information I do possess, he said. There is a new viceroy on the throne of the royal kingdom now, and much has changed since you visited us last. The borders are open. Any man kidnapped to assist with the Great Dam or any other engineering project have been released without compensation or apology to return to their homes and families. Men of talent are employed now, not enslaved, should they choose to remain.
I am glad to hear it, but what does that have to do with our father?
Freddie asked.
Men have returned to their homes all over the territories, following notices in the papers and published lists of the missing. We have been notified in most cases and closed out dozens of files. If a man chooses not to come in to ask where his family has gone, or even to identify himself as having been a prisoner, then we can only assume he has his reasons. Of course, if a man chooses to be seen in Reno and then returns to the royal kingdom to seek employment, we would not be informed at all.
Our father would never, Daisy began, her voice rising.
If after having seen his name on our published lists, Professor Linden reports to any of our detachments, we will notify you at once.
But he may not be able to—
Good day, Miss Linden. I am sorry I could not tell you what you wanted to hear. Please keep me informed of your whereabouts while you are in the territories.
And before Daisy could protest or scream or grasp a pillar and refuse to be moved, she and Freddie found themselves and their baggage outside on the boardwalk, in the shade of the portal once again. The warm air fanned her hot face, bringing with it the raw green scent of chilies being roasted somewhere in the warren of adobe buildings. A fine black horse trotted past bearing a Texican Ranger, and above the flat roofs, blackbirds with enormous wingspans circled the slender spires of rock that were as numerous as trees in this city.
Daisy,
Freddie touched her arm.
What shall we do now?
I haven't the faintest idea, she said, watching the birds circling, and wondering what might be up there on the pinnacles to attract them so. Chapter 2. Wednesday, August 21st, 1895. 12:50 p.m. William Barnicott had not actually tested the flight capabilities of his peculiar conveyance. Part landau, part apothecary shop, part balloon. Mostly because, should he attempt to find its limits in either altitude or speed, he would likely kill himself, falling from the sky like Icarus, having ventured too close to the sun. Besides, it was cold in the upper reaches of the air, and he had had enough of frigid Boston winters to last a lifetime. Following their train journey from Georgetown, Daisy Linden and her sister Frederica were to have boarded the packet from Denver to Santa Fe at 10 o'clock this morning. Though he travelled at a lower altitude than the airship they had boarded, he had had a head start. So, when he circled the Santa Fe airfield, he was pleased to see the packet already there and sitting high in the air at its mooring mast. From this he could safely conclude that the passengers had already disembarked. It was nearly 1 o'clock, and breakfast had worn off some time ago. Time for him to find a flat spot himself and fix a little sustenance before he bobbed into town. Or better yet, he might pay a visit to old friends in a place where he could expect safe moorage and a happy welcome. He brought the conveyance about in a wide turn, and within 15 minutes was coming in to land on the spacious, flat terrace of his mentor, Elia's home. The entire family lived together, the widow Elia, her grown sons, Tobin and Alonzo, and Tobin's wife, their baby and her 2 little boys by her first husband. As the conveyance settled onto its ground wheels, the boys spilled out of the adobe arch.
"Barney! Barney! Give us a ride!"
Laughing, he swept them up in a hug.
"Soon enough. I have been in the air all morning, and I need to thaw my bones."
They ran around the back of the conveyance to open the door, where a sweet or 2 might be found in the nearest drawer, only to skid to a halt on the warm paving stones of the terrace.
"Who are you?"
the eldest demanded.
"I,"
came an all too familiar voice.
"Hands off this conveyance. Who are you, I might be asking?"
The bottom seemed to fall out of William's stomach, and he dashed around the vehicle's rear to skid to an astonished halt in much the same way as the boys. For on the back steps, their limbs frozen and cramped in a position they could not seem to relinquish, were Davy and Lynn, whom he had thought safely going about their own lives in Georgetown.
"Hello, Barney,"
Lynn managed between chattering teeth. "What in the name of all the skies are you doing here?" seemed rather inadequate, for it was quite obvious what they were doing there. Stowing away. Never mind. Questions could wait, for both of them would be down with pneumonia before he could say Jack Robinson if he did not get them pried off those steps and into a hot bath.
"Boys, run and ask your grandmother to help me."
"No need," came the musical voice of Elia as she stepped out on the terrace.
"I am glad indeed to see you, William."
She never used his nickname, being of the tradition that the use of one's real name was a contract of friendship. Even then, she and each member of the village possessed more than one name, a public one, such as Elia, one used by the family, and a secret one known only to the priests and gods. She hugged him in a way that made him think of his mother, or rather, the way he had wished his mother could have been when he was a boy. He hugged her back.
"I'm glad to see you too, Mother."
He used the Navapai word, both as an honorific and an acknowledgment of what she meant to him.
"I have just discovered a pair of stowaways from Georgetown who need care. They have flown all this way on the steps of my vehicle without a stitch of protection from the elements."
"I gave Lim a coat,"
Davy objected.
"A generous gesture," Elia said. "Come, your limbs have tightened for fear of falling, but we must get you inside. The boiler is full of hot water, and we will pump up enough coal from the spring to make you a bath."
As she spoke, she and William both pried the children's chilled fingers from the steps and carried them into the house. Her daughter-in-law had already poured hot water into copper wash-tubs set behind screens, and within minutes both children were stripped and submerged to their noses. William took himself off to the terrace to tie his conveyance down and caught up on all the news of the village from the boys. The sun had crossed an hour's worth of sky when he was joined once more by his unexpected passengers. Davy wore a pair of the dungarees favoured by cowboys that had clearly come out of Elia's stockpile for when her grandsons grew a little bigger. His shirt was the same as the ones they wore. Unbleached cotton, no buttons, only a V for the head to poke through, and a tie at the throat. Lynn was dressed similarly to the Navapai woman, in a cotton shift with a woven overdress featuring a water monster pattern along the bottom. Her cropped hair was held back on one side, with a silver comb with the same pattern pressed into it. Both children moved as fluidly as children should, no longer cramped and crabbed. It remained to be seen whether they would take a chill, in which case this was the very best place they could be, with an expert healer to care for them. Cautiously they approached him. Lynn handed him one of the pottery cups made in the village, keeping the other for herself.
"That lady says we are to drink 3 of these, but you only 1.
The familiar scent of grass and honey and summer caressed his nostrils, and he drank deeply of the healing draught.
"She must think I am as cold as you two."
He flexed his fingers.
"Not quite, but I would never turn down a drink of this. It's a wonder cure. Bottoms up."
To his surprise, they both drank down the summer tea without complaint. If his recollections of his own boyhood mishaps were any indication, They were probably being as obedient as they knew how in the hopes that they'd be able to talk him round to keeping them. But as much as he liked Davy and Lynn, and as much as they'd been through together in recent weeks, he knew nothing about children except how to treat coughs and scrapes. He had travelled alone for a couple of years now, and had grown to like it. Besides, the hazards of travel in the Wild West were a challenge to an armed man. It was no place for children.
"May we sit with you?"
Lynn asked. "Please," Davy added, in case William's reply might be decided by whether their manners came up to scratch. "Of course. Mind the wall, though. It looks as though it would make a good seat, but the drop on the other side is 500 feet at least." Cautiously, Davy peered over the parapet. "Crikey!" He scuttled backward in the manner of a startled crab, and settled on one of the wide steps, gripping the stone with a hand on either side of his legs, as though the mesa might shake him off at any moment. "How about you tell me how you came to be frozen to my conveyance?" William inquired pleasantly. Davy and Lynn exchanged a glance in which Davy seemed to understand that he was to do the talking. "It was my idea," he said at last. "I got no one in Georgetown, and neither does Lynn, and, well, it don't seem such a safe place as it used to be anymore." "And you think flying off into the Wild West with me would be safer?" The logic of children escaped him. "Lynn, you were set up with respectable employment as a laundress, and a kind landlord in Mr. Bjorn Hansen. What is your reasoning? For I must confess I do not understand it."
I don't want to be a laundress," the girl swallowed. "Mr. Hansen is kind, but I do not know him."
And men had not been kind in the girl's experience. William himself had only met her because she had been beaten within an inch of her life by a gentleman with an ebony cane. She had refused his advances because she was a laundress and not a desert flower. But it had made no difference in his mind. She was employed in a flower house, and therefore she was available for his pleasure. The ugly truth could not be denied, no matter how resourceful she was. A 13-year-old Canton girl on her own in the Territories was a target as defenceless as a mourning dove in a rifle's sights. She needed the protection of someone strong and reputable. "Mr. Hansen is an honourable man, Lynn," William said gently. "He would not allow any harm to come to you."
"He couldn't prevent it coming to himself,"
Davy pointed out with all the tact of a hammer on a nail.
"If it weren't for you, and Miss Daisy, and Miss Freddie, and the Rocky Mountain detective, he'd have been hanged instead of that other nasty scoundrel."
William sighed. This time the child's logic was irrefutable. "But I cannot keep you," he said. "I see no other course but to fly you back to Georgetown in the morning. Inside the vehicle this time."
"No,"
Lynn said, her face as pale as unpainted porcelain.
"We want to stay with you."
"It would not be right. I, a single man with no means to provide for you, no means to educate you. How will you learn a trade, or feed yourselves, or grow up as anything but a pair of vagabonds?"
"People call me that now,"
Davy said. His hand still gripped the stone. Did he expect William to tear him away bodily?
"And I have a trade,"
Lynn said, "which you cannot ply if you fly about clinging to the back of conveyances." William steeled himself against their clean but utterly woebegone faces. "But you can ply it in Georgetown. Mr. Hansen will see that you go to school in the mornings. It was all arranged."
"But I don't want to live with Mr. Hansen," she said again, more desperately this time. "The chances of my being able to find my aunt are better travelling about with you than staying there. She could be here."
She waved in the general direction of Santa Fe in the distance, with its spires of rock that formed a grim reminder that the Texican Rangers had their headquarters here.
"Or anywhere you go."
"That's right," Davy put in. "We know we're safe with you, Barney. Cold sometimes, and hungry, I expect, but safe." "It is out of the question," he said helplessly. "It simply will not do." Elia came out on the terrace as though she sensed he had come to the end of his arguments. Lynn blinked rapidly so that a stranger might not see her tears, and lifted her chin. Pride was the only thing left to the poor child. Even the clothes on her back did not belong to her. Perhaps we might postpone our difficult decisions until after we have eaten. Elia gestured them inside. In any case, my young visitors must not venture forth into the world until it is clear.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?